Freakonomics, A Rogue Economist Explores the Hidden Side of Everything, by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. Introduction. Imagine for a moment you're running a daycare center. You have a simple, clear policy. Parents must pick up their children by 4 p.m. But every day, a few parents are late. The kids get anxious, and one of your teachers has to stay late, unpaid, waiting. It's a frustrating problem. So you decide to get clever. You bring in a pair of economists, and they offer what seems like a perfectly logical solution: fine the tardy parents. After all, an incentive should work, right? A small penalty, just $3, for anyone more than 10 minutes late. It's a simple economic nudge to encourage good behavior. The fine is put into place, and the number of late parents goes up. In fact, it more than doubles. How is this possible? How could a penalty, designed to discourage a behavior, actually make it worse? This is the kind of riddle that lies at the heart of one of the most surprising and influential books of the last few decades, Freakonomics. Published in 2005, Freakonomics became an instant phenomenon, a New York Times bestseller that stayed on the list for years. It has sold millions of copies and has been translated into dozens of languages. But its real impact wasn't just in sales. It completely changed the way millions of people look at the world. The book came from a unique partnership. On one side, you have Stephen D. Levitt, a brilliant young economist at the University of Chicago who had just won a prestigious award often called the Junior Nobel Prize. But here's the secret about Levitt. He'd be the first to tell you he doesn't know much about economics in the traditional sense. He's not good at math, and he has no idea if the stock market will go up or down. What he has is an almost supernatural curiosity and a gift for asking fascinating questions. Questions like, what do schoolteachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? Or, if drug dealers make so much money, why do they still live with their moms? On the other side, you have Stephen J. Dubner, a talented journalist sent to write a profile on this odd economist. Together, they created a new way of looking at things, a field they playfully named Freakonomics. It's not a book about money or markets. It's a book that peels back the layers of everyday life to reveal the hidden mechanics underneath. It's about understanding how the world actually works, not how we think it should work. And the promise of this book, the promise I want to share with you today, is that by the end of our journey, you will be equipped with a new lens to view the world. You'll begin to see the hidden incentives that drive human behavior. You'll learn to question the conventional wisdom that everyone else accepts as truth, and you'll realize that the most dramatic effects in life often have the most subtle and distant causes. Let's begin. Book summary. So, what went wrong at that daycare center? The $3 fine was meant to be a penalty, an economic incentive. But it did something unexpected. It replaced a moral incentive. Before the fine, parents who were late felt a sense of guilt. They knew they were inconveniencing the teacher. But now, with the fine, that guilt was gone. For just $3, they could buy a clear conscience. The fine sent a signal that being late wasn't such a big deal. In fact, for a busy parent, $3 was a pretty good price for a little extra babysitting. This is the first great lesson of Freakonomics. Incentives are the cornerstone of modern life. If you want to understand why people do what they do, you have to understand the incentives, the rewards and punishments, that shape their choices. An incentive is a tiny lever that can move the world. But as the daycare story shows, if you don't understand human nature, that lever can send things moving in the exact opposite direction. The authors explain that incentives come in 3 flavors: economic, like a fine or a bonus; social, like the shame of being seen as a bad parent; and moral, like your own internal sense of right and wrong. Often, these incentives work together. But sometimes, as with the daycare, one can accidentally cancel another out. A similar thing happened in a study on blood donations. When people were offered a small cash payment to donate blood, donations actually went down. The payment turned a noble act of charity into a painful way to make a few dollars, and it just wasn't worth it. Of course, wherever there's an incentive, there's a flip side. For every person who creates a system, there are a dozen others trying to figure out how to beat it. As the old saying goes, a thing worth having is a thing worth cheating for. And Freakonomics shows us that cheating is everywhere, a primordial economic act, getting more for less. Think about this. In 1987, 7 million American children suddenly vanished. It wasn't a kidnapping wave. It was the night the IRS changed a rule. For the first time, taxpayers had to provide a social security number for each dependent child they claimed. And just like that, 7 million phantom children, who had only existed as tax exemptions, disappeared into thin air. The incentive to cheat was clear. But cheating isn't just for tax evaders. The authors take us into a place we'd never expect to find it, the classroom. Not the students, but the teachers. In the 1990s, high-stakes testing became the norm in places like the Chicago public schools. A school's funding, a teacher's job, even a school's very existence, could depend on students' test scores. This created a powerful new incentive for teachers. Suddenly, a teacher whose students performed poorly could be passed over for a promotion, or even fired. So, how would a teacher cheat? Stephen Levitt, being the data detective he is, decided to find out. He got his hands on the test answers for every student in the Chicago school system over 7 years, nearly 100 million individual answers. Then, he built an algorithm to hunt for cheaters. He thought like a cheat. A teacher wouldn't change every answer. That would be too obvious. They probably wouldn't have enough time either. So maybe they would pick a string of consecutive questions and fill in the correct answers for a portion of their students. The algorithm searched for unusual patterns. For instance, a block of identical correct answers on the hardest questions at the end of the test. Or a classroom full of students who had a miraculous one-year spike in their scores, only to fall back to their old level the following year. And he found them. In classroom after classroom, the data told a clear story. In one sixth-grade class, 15 out of 22 students, most of them subpar students, had somehow managed to get the exact same 6 consecutive hard questions right. It was practically impossible. The algorithm even revealed that the teacher had filled in some wrong answers as well, perhaps to cover her tracks, or maybe because she didn't know the correct answers herself. This cheating wasn't just a harmless bit of rule-bending. It was a profound betrayal. Those students were promoted to the 7th grade believing they had earned it, only to fail miserably because they were never actually prepared. A cheating teacher, the authors note, is far more concerned with helping herself than her students. After Levitt published his findings, the CEO of the Chicago schools, a man named Arne Duncan, actually used the algorithm to catch and fire the cheating teachers. The next year, cheating in the school system fell by more than 30%. The incentive had changed again. This idea, that experts will use their position to their own advantage, is a recurring theme in the book. And it leads to one of its most famous questions: how is the Ku Klux Klan like a group of real estate agents? It sounds like a bad joke, but the answer is profound. Both groups derive their power from holding information that others don't have. This is called information asymmetry. Let's start with the Klan. In the 1940s, the KKK was experiencing a resurgence. Its power didn't just come from violence, but from fear. And that fear was amplified by the Klan's secrecy, its secret passwords, its bizarre rituals, its made-up language where a conversation was a conversation. All this secret information made the Klan seem like an impenetrable, all-powerful empire. But then a man named Stetson Kennedy came along. Kennedy was a writer who hated everything the Klan stood for. He realized that trying to fight the Klan from the outside was useless. The real way to defeat them was to destroy their information advantage. Kennedy used an informant inside the Klan to gather all their secrets. And then he did something brilliant. He gave them to the producers of the Adventures of Superman radio show. Suddenly, Kids all across America were playing games with the Klan's secret passwords. The Klan's sacred rituals became a running gag on a children's radio program. Kennedy turned their most precious asset, their secret information, into a tool for mockery. Stripped of its mystique, the Klan began to wither. He had turned their information asymmetry on its head. Now, what about real estate agents? An agent is an expert you hire to act on your behalf. They know the market. They know the value of your house. They know the buyers. They have a massive information advantage. And you trust them to use it to get you the best price, right? Well, let's look at the incentives. An agent typically gets a commission of around 6%, but that's split with the buyer's agent, and then each agent gives half to their agency. So your agent might only pocket 1.5% of the sale price. On your $300,000 house, that's $4,500. But what if, with a little more patience and effort, she could sell it for $310,000? That extra $10,000 would be great for you. But for her 1.5% share of that extra $10,000 is just $150. Are your incentives really aligned? Is she willing to put in weeks of extra work for just $150? To find out, Levitt looked at the data. He analyzed nearly 100,000 home sales in Chicago and found a curious thing. Thousands of those homes were owned by the real estate agents themselves. So he could compare how an agent sells her own home versus how she sells a client's home. The results were stunning. When an agent sells her own house, she leaves it on the market an average of 10 days longer and sells it for over 3% more. That's an extra $10,000 on a $300,000 house. When she sells your house, her incentive is to convince you to take the first decent offer that comes along. She wants to make a deal, and make it fast. Her tiny share of a better price is too small an incentive to make her wait. She uses her information advantage, her knowledge of the market, to create fear. She might tell you about the nicer house down the street that's been sitting unsold for months, converting her information into your fear of not selling at all. This abusive information is everywhere. But the authors point out something hopeful. The internet is the great disinfectant for information asymmetry. Websites that let you compare prices for term life insurance, for instance, caused prices to fall dramatically. The secrets that experts used to hoard are now available to anyone with a few clicks. The gap between the expert and the public is shrinking every day. This brings us to maybe the most famous, and most controversial, idea in Freakonomics, the mystery of the Great American Crime Drop. In the early 1990s, the United States was in the grip of a crime wave. Experts predicted a coming bloodbath of violence, led by a new generation of ruthless teenage superpredators. President Clinton warned that if something wasn't done, the country would be living with chaos. And then, something happened that no one expected. Instead of going up, crime began to fall. And fall, and fall, and fall. The drop was massive, persistent, and it happened everywhere, in every category of crime. It was entirely unanticipated, especially by the experts who had just been predicting the opposite. So, why did it happen? The experts, quick to explain the drop they had failed to predict, offered a range of perfectly logical theories. It was the roaring 1990s economy, they said. It was new, smarter policing strategies, like the broken windows theory in New York City. It was tougher gun control laws. These theories were encouraging. They suggested that we had the power to stop crime all along. There was just one problem. According to Levitt's analysis, they were almost all wrong. The strong economy? Studies show virtually no link between the economy and violent crime. Innovative policing? Crime went down everywhere, even in cities with notoriously bad police forces. Tougher gun laws? With a thriving black market, criminals don't buy their guns legally anyway. Capital punishment? Executions are so rare in the U.S. that they don't create a meaningful deterrent. So what really caused the crime drop? Levitt's data points to a few factors. An increase in the number of police officers was one. A massive increase in the prison population was another. Simply put, Criminals who are locked up can't commit crimes on the street. And the end of the crack cocaine boom of the 1980s also played a role. When the profits from selling crack dried up, so did much of the violence associated with the drug trade. But these factors combined only explained about half of the crime drop. There was another factor, a much bigger one, that no one was talking about. It was an event that had happened more than 20 years earlier, and it involved a young woman in Dallas named Norma McCorvey, better known to the world as Jane Roe. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade legalized abortion across the United States. This had a profound, though delayed, effect. The authors are very clear: this is not a moral argument about abortion. It is simply an analysis of data. Here's the logic. Decades of research have shown that children who are born unwanted, who grow up in poverty, or in a single-parent home, or with a teenage mother, are far more likely to become criminals later in life. These were precisely the circumstances of the millions of women who were most likely to have an abortion following Roe v. Wade. They were women who, for any number of reasons, felt they were not in a position to provide a good home for a child. Because of Roe v. Wade, these children, who had the highest statistical risk of becoming criminals, were never born. Years later, just as this unborn generation would have entered their prime years for crime, the crime rate began to plummet. The pool of potential criminals had dramatically shrunk. The authors use a powerful reverse example to illustrate this. In 1966, the dictator of Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, made abortion illegal to boost the population. The children born in the wake of this ban had miserable lives. Compared to children born just a year earlier, they did worse in school, had less success in the job market, and were far more likely to become criminals. And in 1989, it was this very generation of unwanted children, now teenagers and young adults, who led the bloody protests that overthrew and executed Ceausescu. The link between legalized abortion and the drop in crime is a jarring and uncomfortable idea. It's an example of a dramatic effect with a distant, subtle cause. But according to the data, it explains more of the 1990s crime drop than all the other factors combined. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most personal, territory that the book explores: parenting. If an unwanted child is so much more likely to have a bad life, what makes a wanted child have a good one? What makes a perfect parent? Parents today are bombarded with advice from experts, and that advice is often contradictory and fear-based. We are terrified of doing the wrong thing. We worry about guns in our neighbor's house, but we're less worried about their swimming pool, even though the data shows a child is about 100 times more likely to die in a swimming pool than in an accident involving a gun. We fear what is dramatic and rare, not what is common and quiet. So, with all this obsessive parenting, how much do parents really matter? To answer this, the authors dive into a massive government study called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, or ECLS, which tracked the academic progress of more than 20,000 children from kindergarten through 5th grade. Using a statistical tool called regression analysis, which is a fancy way of isolating one factor to see its true impact, they were able to uncover some stunning correlations. They looked at dozens of factors and found that some things parents do seem to matter a lot less than we think. For instance, the data showed no correlation between a child's early test scores and whether their parents read to them every day, or whether they took them to museums, or whether the child watched a lot of television, or even whether the family was intact. This is shocking news for any parent who has spent years diligently reading Goodnight Moon. So what does matter? The data pointed to a different set of factors, things that parents are. A child with highly educated parents tends to do well in school. A child whose parents have a high socioeconomic status does well. A child whose mother was 30 or older when she had her first child does well. What's the common thread? It's not so much what you do as a parent, but who you are. Smart, successful, educated parents tend to have smart, successful, educated children. The things that truly matter were often decided long before you even picked up a parenting book: who you are, whom you married, the kind of life you lead. This idea is powerfully reinforced in the book's final exploration: a child's name. Does the name you give your child affect their destiny? We hear the strange but true story of two brothers, one named Winner and the other, Loser. In a perfect twist of fate, Loser Lane grew up to be a successful police sergeant, while Winner Lane has a criminal record a mile long. So a name isn't destiny. But does it matter at all? The authors look at a huge database of birth certificates from California and find a stark difference between the names black parents and white parents give their children. They find that, on average, a person with a distinctively black name, say, Deshaun, has a worse life outcome than a person with a distinctively white name, like Jake. So, the name is the problem, right? An employer sees the name Deshaun on a resume and discriminates? Well, not so fast. The data reveals something deeper. A name is not a cause of a person's outcome, it is an indicator. The kind of parent who names their son Jake is, on average, likely to be more educated and have a higher income than the kind of parent who names their son Deshaun. It isn't the name that's holding Deshaun back, it's the circumstances into which he was born, circumstances that are merely reflected in his name. It comes back to the same powerful lesson: what matters most is not what you call your child, but who you are. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through Freakonomics, it's worth pausing to think about the single, powerful thread that runs through all these strange and fascinating stories. It's not economics. It's not even data. It's a way of thinking. It's the courage to question what everyone else takes for granted. We live in a world overflowing with information, and yet, we are often guided by what the author John Kenneth Galbraith called conventional wisdom. These are the ideas that are simple, comfortable, and convenient. We hold on to them like a raft in a complex world. The roaring economy stopped crime. Good schools make smart kids. The name you choose will shape your child's future. These ideas feel right. They make sense. But as Freakonomics shows us, again and again, they are often wrong. The most profound lesson of this book is that the world is a far more knowable place than we think, but to understand it, we have to be willing to set aside our feelings, our biases, and our moral compass, just for a moment, and simply follow the data. The book reminds us that morality represents the world as we would like it to be, while economics represents the world as it actually is. And sometimes, the gap between the two is staggering. Why does this matter so much today? Because we are constantly being sold a story? By politicians, by marketers, by experts of every stripe. They use information, and our lack of it, to shape our choices. They appeal to our emotions, especially fear, because emotion is the enemy of rational thought. The ability to think like a Freakonomist is a kind of superpower in this environment. It's the ability to step back and ask the simple, powerful questions. What is the real incentive here? What does the data actually say? What if the opposite is true? This book doesn't give you a set of easy answers. Instead, it gives you a set of better questions. And that is far more valuable. So, what can you do with this today? Here are a few simple ideas. First, the next time you see a behavior that seems strange or irrational, don't just judge it. Get curious. Ask yourself, what might be the hidden incentive driving this person? What reward or penalty, seen only by them, is shaping their actions? Second, the next time an expert on television or an article online presents you with a shocking statistic, pause. Ask yourself, what is this person's agenda? What's in it for them to make me believe this? Is there another side to this story that isn't being told? And finally, start looking at your own world with a fresh pair of eyes. The book's subtitle is A Rogue Economist Explores the Hidden Side of Everything. The most important word there is explores. You don't need a PhD in economics to be an explorer. You just need a healthy dose of curiosity and a willingness to see things not just as they appear, but as they really are. That was a summary of Freakonomics by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner. We've touched on the major ideas today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a photograph of a great adventure. The real magic happens when you experience it for yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is here to help you decide if this is a journey you want to take. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning new facts, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see the hidden patterns of your own life. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it gave you something to think about, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep exploring, and let's keep growing together.